Okay. All right, that was it. I just signed out and signed back into my account. All right, so first thing I want to do is I want to debrief on last week's case study. Again, excellent job by everybody. I was so pleased. And I thank you. Make sure that you upload your group presentation in the Dropbox so that you can get your credit for the work that you've done. Make sure that you make a reflection. I'll call out Nate for his reflection. Nate's reflection really wasn't about the case. It was about the process. And I like that. I like that he shared that with everybody, you know, that he shared that with me. A big part of this is every time that we get together with our superintendent advisory committee, and we have one at Gardner Webb, and I talk with them regularly. And the big thing they say is teach people to collaborate, how to work in groups, how to get along with people who aren't always the easiest to get along with. Teach administrators how to maybe facilitate employees that aren't the most industrious, and how to assign tasks and hold people accountable. That I told you, we're going to another level of collaboration. In your very first class, all you did was you wrote peer reviews. In your second class, you did a little, you might have done a little video of that. Third class, next level up, we're going to collaborate to make a product. Collaborating, just getting on the video screen and chatting and having a meeting is a level of collaboration, but it's the lowest level. The next level up is just being able to collaborate to produce a product. And then when you get to 605, you're going to have another level of collaboration, and I'll let that be a surprise to you at that point. But you're going to have another one. Now, Dr. Sanders will have a level of collaboration for you next time. That's going to be collaborating on group projects. It's a little different than this. It's about the same level, but it's a little different perspective. But we'll hit the highest level of collaboration where you do independent individual work. That's new. That's not just a report. It's empirical. You'll do that when you get to 5, and that's the highest level of collaboration that there is. So I'm very pleased at what you did. I'm still with you. Let me stop my video just a second. I'm still with you. I want to call Jimmy. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Are you at ball game, Jimmy?
Yes, sir.
Well, quickly, Jimmy, I want you to tell me what you learned last week.
Oh, I mean, what I learned from just about the cases that I was dealing with the state of North Carolina, I didn't know that with dealing with as far as with cheating, I know that it could be a misdemeanor, but I didn't know as far as the way that they handle it from the state level with the students. So that's why I knew I had to be advised by going back to the local level and what the local boys went about it. And I know in our county, in Cumberland County Schools, basically they lose on the discretion of the principal. Right. So it was more interesting with me with dealing with on that factor, because we never really had issues on that end. Well, I never had to deal with it personally, but once I started doing the research from the local standpoint, they use a lot of discretion on the principal. So right. Basically, they have the wiggle room to handle it which way. So with that case that we would have to actually examine, I saw that those aspects of it, it kind of put it in a situation where, you really want to make sure you do your homework and make sure that you are following the laws of the state and making sure that you was not, going to be, over on any level with having any effect that will jeopardize your job or anybody else in the building.
That's exactly right. Thank you for that, Jimmy. And so yes, that's the reason I called on Jimmy. Jimmy's made a wonderful point in that too many principals think that their names on the deed and not just on the door, that they have the ultimate discretion to do and act any way that they want to. Please remember that your actions are always under review, that any decision you make can be appealed to the next level up. And if you break the law, there's federal law that you have to go by, and state law and local board policy, and you have to understand how each of those works. And again, on this grading scale, even if you wanted to, even if you thought it was a good idea, you as the principal could not allow a teacher's grading scale to be outside of the defined state limits. It's just not, that's not allowable. And you got the federal law. And so again, the point that I made, and I want to make sure I make this point again, when it says a student may fail, it can only mean the assignment. Federal law says you can't fail a kid for the year. That's not allowable. That's a zero tolerance expulsion. And so sometimes we have to put all these things together. And so when I was working with my doctoral group yesterday, we had class this weekend. That's one of those things that I told to them. Now, understanding that this is a group of EDCI doctorals that I'm doing a block with them. And they are completely new to any concept of school administration. And one of them asked me, so how are we going to remember all that? You have to develop a sense, a spidey sense almost. For me, it's easy because the hair on my back stands up, not on my head, obviously, but but you have to have that sixth sense. But the big thing is, if you don't know, what is it Snoop Dogg says you better act somebody. You better act somebody. I love that commercial. I want that commercial as to be the motto for this class. I say this every case study, every year, in every semester in this class. You better ask somebody. But I love how Snoop says, you better ask somebody. And that's the thing here. If you can't know, if you don't remember, it should strike a note with you. You should hear, wait a minute, a kid failed for the year over a homework assignment or an out of class project or whatever we want to call it. Wait a minute, that doesn't sound exactly right. And you start getting into, well, how did the teacher not know? Well, we know the teacher had to know because that's one of the requirements on the workday is to cover the grading scale, the policy, the testing, how much everything costs. I mean, how much everything, the value of everything in terms of percentages. How is it that pretty soon, wait a minute, this is not really a case about the grading scale at all. This is a teacher took a run at a kid. And they'll do it different ways. And I do want to remember, where's Willie? There's Willie. I see Willie's icon. Please remember, Willie's a coach and Jimmy coaches. Coaches, I want to advise you, it's been a day or two since I chased kids around the high school ball field, but I did. But don't let people put the school-wide discipline, especially for academic issues, on you. Don't try to be everybody's hero. You're risking double jeopardy and other issues, and you're risking other violations and other things. I had a great football coach. Well, I had two football coaches when I was at the same school when I was a high school principal. And the first coach that I had was not a good. He was not good. Period. And the second coach I had was excellent, but he wasn't just excellent in terms of being a football coach. He was an excellent person, Pete Gilchrist. If any of you ever worked and he went back to Winston-Salem where he was from, but he coached for me in Charlotte and he was a great guy. But one of the things that Pete had high expectations for his kids, and he really wanted them to be good citizens. But even him, I had to caution him about, if the handbook says this is what the most we can give or what we can do to this kid, you got to be careful about stepping outside of that. Now, Pete was not trying to be, he just wanted his kids to be good young men. I mean, Pete participated in the 100 Men of Charlotte. I mean, Pete was a leader in his community, and he wanted what was best for his kids and our kids. But even if you're coming from a good place in your heart, coaches, I'm just going to say, coaches, don't get involved in it. It's just the risk far outweighs the reward of coaches getting involved trying to do school discipline. It's outside of the realm of due process. That's the thing we got to remember. When coaches get involved, that's outside of the realm of due process. If you become an administrator, can you still, is that conflict? Some districts won't let you, some will. At charter schools, they'll let you. But be careful with that as well. Make sure that you well define that role. I go back to one of my students who was at Community School of Davidson, right across the road from you. He came through the program about 10 years ago, and he was athletic director, coach, and became a quasi administrator. And that was one of the conversations that he and I had even back then. Most public schools systems have it defined that you can't do that. But charters and privates are a little bit different, but still, as you know, kid doesn't drop his due process rights when he steps to the schoolhouse door, whether you're a charter or private or straight public. Doesn't matter. They still get due process. And that's the problems with getting coaches involved, is it alters that due process cycle of what they're due. Remember, we have substantive and procedural. Substantive is what are they supposed to get? Procedural is what you did. And so we had a case recently. It's kind of one of those where we trick the doctoral students. They think they're so smart. Where a lady came in and at a place like where Sonia works, at an alternative school for, discipline type school. And so they had this lady who was really qualified, but she was only 4 feet tall. She was a little person. And they got focused on that. But the real issue is the principal stepped outside of the hiring due process and did not do the interview with her the way he had done it with everybody else. And so the issue was not how big she was. She could have been big as a bear, but been as big as me. That wasn't where the law was violated. The law was violated in that the actual procedural due process was not followed carefully. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about hiring in a couple of weeks. That regardless of due process for hiring does not change, but the process, how it's employed, the substance of it's the same for everybody. The procedure is different. I worked in one district where I had to call all the references. I had to set up the appointments. I had to vet their CV, their background. I had to get their transcripts. I had to do everything. I also worked in Charlotte where all I had to do was just call my analyst in HR and said, send me 3 candidates. And I just picked the one I want. That's all I had to do. Now, but the process that they went through in both of those districts was the same. It was just who did it. And so the issue is when you step outside of what we say that we're going to do in terms of due process, when we get a coach involved, you're putting them at risk and yourself at risk as well. I like that Tyler just chimed in that he knows that in Iredell and let's see, Iredell and Alexander that they won't let you do both. And that's a good point. And one of the reasons why is because of supervision. It's hard for you to do your supervision if you're coaching. I mean, that's not supervising. And so that's a good point. But if you're while you're still before you transition into administration, if you're coaching, please, be mindful of due process and double jeopardy, punishing a kid twice. Dr. Sane, I'm going to go to you because I know this is right up your alley. I'll let you speak to this.
So I was just sitting here when you were talking about asking somebody. One of the first assignments that I give new administrators is that they must find somebody that from outside of their school, another administrator, that they can run every situation by, so that they get an outside opinion, an outside context. They're not biased. They're not tied to a situation emotionally, and talk through every situation. And I mean, I tell them every situation so that they ultimately make the best decisions for their schools and their students, but then also to protect themselves. I just keep going back to that advice. You always have to find that one person that you can go to. And I know, Tyler, you're already in that role, so hopefully you found that person. There's only one high school in your district, I believe, but if somebody, hopefully you have another administrator that you can talk to, get feedback from, and make sure that you're following these processes so that you're protecting yourself ultimately.
Yeah.
And I'll just say also to the athletic things, I also tell our administrators, school is one thing, athletics is another, and there is a big wall between them, and the two should not merge at any time. There may be some discipline that you have to deal with in terms of like spectators and things, or maybe something that happened on the court, on the field. But other than that, there is a definite wall between the two.
I know it. Some of the things I say are kind of nonsense. Thank you, Dr. Singer. Kind of nonsensical. But one of the things you hear me refer to all the time is what I refer to as the second shift. Obviously, that's vernacular from my era of when we were a manufacturing economy in North Carolina, South Carolina, when there was a mill on about every corner of some sort, and you had first, second, and third shift. And one of the things that you realized about these places is they didn't overlap at all. There was a completely different administration. It was a completely different organization. First shift, the second shift, the third shift. And that's one of the reasons why I refer to athletics and after school activities as the second shift. It is not an extension of the first shift. It is not just more of the same day. It's a completely separate thing. You got to understand that, and you have to treat it that way. And that's why I have always referred to it as the second shift. We have different workers. We have a different job. We have a different role. We're not doing the same thing we did on the first shift. It is not just an extension of that. It's a completely separate thing. It has its own rules and guidelines. And you have to make sure that you separate it and keep it that way and keep them at arm's length. If they bleed over into one another, you become something you don't want to be. You become athletic factories, and you become things where you forget what your core competency is. Again, Jones sausage, they make sausage. In school, we teach kids. We have to keep that in perspective all the time. One of the things that we talked about yesterday with our doctorals is the Finland phenomenon. I would highly recommend you watch that video, that film documentary, the Finland phenomenon. But what the part that I take away from it every time is they don't do athletics in school. They do like the rec league, like the towns and the cities. That's who runs their they do not run athletics at school or through school at all. So that when they have school, they can focus on academics. As somebody who's been through that, that would be my ideal. If there was one thing that I could change going forward, and I could see, that be beyond my lifetime, is that schools get out of the. I'm not anti-athletics at all, but we can't do everything. It was, and I was part of the group. I'll be the first to admit. But where this all started, I think, and where we kind of went down the wrong path was when it was decided back in the 50s and early 60s that we would use schools to vaccinate kids for polio. And so when I was a youngster, I had to go to school on Sundays and get my sugar cube with my polio vaccine. And it started as innocently as that, to the point where now schools are asked to do a myriad of things that don't have a thing in the world to do with education. And we've kind of lost our focus on what's important every day. And so, again, we have to understand that getting coaches involved in discipline is a really bad idea from both an administrative perspective. That's the second shift. And from a coach's perspective, that's a really bad idea. That would not be something that I would recommend at all. And so that's a point that I wanted to make tonight. I was very pleased with your work last week. It was very good. I've been pleased with your writing, your OMA work. We're going to talk about the skip tonight. Very pleased with that. I want to talk about next week's case study. Next week's case study is Leandro. Leandro is the funding case in North Carolina. I hope you read a little bit about it, but I want to kind of give you a background on Leandro, prepare you for that. So a group of low wealth districts, Hoke and I think Robinson, a few more, Vance maybe, they sued the state. Now we have to be very careful and make sure that we understand what they were talking about here. They wanted to change the funding formula. We have a flat funding formula, flat grant funding formula in North and South Carolina. So what that means is for every kid, Willie, that's a definite no. So for every kid, they give you, we're going to use some round numbers. The state funds you $8,000 for every student that you have in your school. Now, they subtract absenteeism from that and they give it to you in 10 payments. They don't give you all of it up front. After the first month, you got to have enough money in fund balance on hand to pay for the first month of school. After that, they reimburse you. And most of that, about 85%, is teacher salaries, by the way. But they give you 1/10 of it. They divide that 8,000. So you get 800 per student, but not for the ones enrolled, just for the ones who attend. So if you've got 10,000 on the roll and your attendance is, is 95%, you only get paid for 9,500. It's the way that works. It doesn't matter if it's an easy kid to educate or a hard kid, or if you're in charge. It doesn't matter where you are, you get the same $8,000. So what the argument was, and I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do a visual here. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm going to make this big enough to read. All right, so you get 8,000 from the state, 8,000 per pupil. All right. So what the state calls that is that student's Leandro right. That means that the state says that every kid is guaranteed a basic education. That law was passed in '84. Every kid gets a basic education. We've gone through this. We talked about this night. We had court cases. All right. And so they said, well, what is a basic ed? Well, they defined it, wrote a curriculum, and now we assess it. And so, and they say, we give you $8,000. We have adjudicated that that's how much that it takes to provide a basic education for a child is $8,000. The low wealth district said, but wait a minute, somebody like Charlotte Mecklenburg adds another 4,000 to that. That they're spending $12,000 per kid.
Are they just able to use that money because they just have an extra $4,000 in the?
They have the tax base to tax people, and they have the local wealth and the businesses and the property values to do that.
Okay.
So and they're willing to do it, and people are willing to pay it, and won't burn the politicians at the stake that do that. We believe in our kids, and we're willing to do it. So at the time that this case study came about, this court case, Charlotte Mecklenburg was spending $12,000 per pupil. We had 140,000 kids in the district, and our budget was $1.6 billion. We were willing to spend that much money. All right, and so what the low wealth district said is, what we want you to do is this. We want you to do, instead of a flat grant funding formula, We want you to go to a district power equalizing formula. That would work like this. So you would give Charlotte Mecklenburg $6,000 of state money, and they would add their 4,000, so that they would spend a total of 10,000 on each of their kids. But the state would only give them 6,000 rather than the 8,000. And what you would do in us low wealth districts, you would give us, you would take that 2 that you took from them, you'd add it to our 8. So in the end, we'd end up with $10,000 as well. And that we would have equal funding. That's what this is. This is the crux of what they wanted. Was the Leandro case was about regardless of what the basic education costs, our kids can't be competitive in the college or the job market because other wealthy districts are willing to spend a whole lot more money than we're capable of. It's not that we don't want to, we can't. We don't have the business, the industry, the infrastructure, the property. We just don't have it. We'd spend it if we had it. But what we want is in the end, so this was CMS was spending 12, and the low wealth people, they were spending the 8 that the state gave them. And they said there's a differential of $4,000. And the way that you do that, you give them 2 less and give us that 2 and give us 2 more. And we both end up with 10.
I have a question that may be too far out there, but it's just me thinking. So don't they do budgets every year and revisit taxes and stuff like that? So if this did happen, wouldn't they have to do a different formula every year?
Well, they would
to figure out who got what? Yep,
they would. But that's a great question. Yeah, they would do that. It's why it's called a district power equalizing formula. It wouldn't be very hard to do it every year. The problem is it's just not going to change. In terms of, what the state, part of what the argument was is, if we could do this one time or two and help you fix it, but you're not going to be any capable 2 years down the road of levying these taxes and getting paid. There, we don't see any financial boon on the horizon for your county. We're going to have to carry you forever. And we're just not going to systemically do that. And so when the state refused to do it, there was a lawsuit. The question, alternative setting, is the funding different, or there's money that comes straight to alternative schools. That's prime bill money from the governor. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
And so the low wealth people said, well, we'll just sue. And they did. Now, I told you, full disclosure, I was on the legal team for the plaintiffs. We lost. Now, let's be clear here. Some of you don't interpret the case correctly. The plaintiffs lost. The state said, we are not changing the funding formula. Let me say that again. It's still a flat formula even today, some 30 years later. It's still 28 years later, or 29 years later, it's still the same flat formula. It did not change. So let's look at what the state held. I pulled this up. So this was what was decided.
You think there was a spike in charter schools because of that? Now we
It's
have a lot of
absolutely.
Yes.
This is 2 things happened, Nate. Good call. 2 things happened as a result of this ruling. Number 1, charters and privates, and charters went through the roof. That this actually opened the door for charters. This is what allowed them to happen, number 1. And number 2, this is how we got the education lottery. And I can't hardly say education lottery without laughing. Nobody gets any money from the education lottery. It's just a regressive tax on poor people. But that's how we got the lottery. So to Nate's point, what they said was when they this is the finding. So said neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. You said, but you said it was no, in the end, you know, that they wanted it to be equal in the end, where they took 2 from the rich, gave to the poor, so they both ended up with 10. The state said you have no constitutional right to that. You have a constitutional right to the minimum funding for a basic education, and we say that's $8,000. That's all you have a right to. You don't have a right to $2,000 of the wealthy district's money to get you to 10 and bring them down from 12 to 10. You have no constitutional right. Why is that? Is the right to a public education in the Constitution? No. It's provided for in the preamble that states may provide public education. And the courts said, they've decided you have no constitutional right to this because it's public education is not in the Constitution. That was what they fell back to, that no constitutional right to equal funding. No, but they do have a fundamental right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. That's their Leandro right. That's $8,000. And that the state of North Carolina, not local school district, have the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard, successfully deliver every child's Leandro right. No exceptions, no excuses. So what that means is, can a district try to regulate the money and give some kids more and some kids less? No. Not only did they say the state's not going to do that, they said you can't do that in your local districts either. You can't take and give money from one side to the other. Can't do it. So when we look at our case study next time, the superintendent, he wants to take and give at-risk kids, schools with at-risk kids, more of the budget. Can he move federal money? Federal money moves with kids, doesn't it? So no, can't move federal money. What does Leandro say about moving state money? No, can't do that. What about local money? Could he move local money? Well, only if what has happened, only if it's been approved in the budget. Only if the county commissioners would go for it, and only if they've approved it. That has not happened. County commissioners would have to be even dumber than I think they are as politicians to prove something like that. Now, people try to get around this. So I've already given you the answer to next week's case study is no, you can't do this. You got to dig in and figure out why and present this. But now, grant money, can you move? No, couldn't move grant money around either, because grant money, you have to tell them up front. Grant money is the most restricted money that you have. Lord, no, you couldn't move grant money. So shortly before the pandemic, or during the pandemic, really, could you use grant money for specific funding? Whatever you said you were going to use it for. Yeah, a lot of times districts will get some grants to try to help at-risk kids, but that's just some specific money going to them. That's not taking the whole district budget and allotting it differently for different students. Yeah, you can get a grant to help with certain things. But this is what he's proposing, is that we take the entire budget for the district and that we unbalance it so that we give more money for these kids over to these schools that have these kids than we give these. And that's in direct violation of what Leandro said. The finding said you can't do that. We could get there's all kind of grant money for at-risk. And that's part of where that money, when Sonia asked for alternative schools, a lot of that's crime bill money for at-risk and to try to stop the school to prison pipeline and all that. And so, yes, we get a per pupil for your kids. We get extra grant money. Most of it's federal that run our alternative schools, and some of it is state. When that was part of my division in CMS, I got 40 million from the state to help. That was a grant and the crime bill money for alternative schools. And when we lost that, we had to close all of them but one, by the way. And so that's part of the problem that you get with grants is it's a grant. It doesn't mean it's not funding. It doesn't come every time. And so you got to be careful about, the biggest thing you got to be careful about grant money is hiring people, because they expect to get paid every month. And when the grant goes, guess what happens to their positions? They go too. So you got to be careful about that. So the superintendent in Chapel Hill, Carborough, said, I'm smarter than the rest of this bunch. And she might have been. She said, I know how I can get around the Leandro rule. She said, in my district, I am allowed to spend up to $90,000 of the general discretion fund in Chapel Hill, Scarborough schools. I'm allowed to spend up to $90,000 without having to get a vote from the school board. So she went out and she contracted with a private education consulting firm to hire extra teachers. I mean, they had the extra teachers, and she did $1 million contract, and she had it divided up into 8 payments, so that no payment was, all the payments were at $89,999. And she had 12 payments of that. Now, Nate says that's sketchy. No, that's illegal. It's well beyond sketchy. That $90,000 is one time. Now you say, well, why didn't she just hire her own teachers with that money? That goes back to personnel. Who hires teachers? That'd be the school board, not the superintendent, not the principal. Remember, you only recommend, and the superintendent recommends to the board. So she knew that the school board would never vote for her to hire her own extra teachers. So she went through a third-party vendor, a consulting firm, who brought in extra teachers and resources to the kids on the Carborough side of Chapel Hill, Carborough. Problem is one of the board members had a grandchild over on the Chapel Hill side, one of the school board members, and she was a retired principal, and she knew the law. She knew Leandra. And she said, wait a minute, you are manipulating the money here. This was a one-time deal of less than $90,000. You're not allowed to do this on and on. You have violated the Leandro law. And of course, let me see, they immediately fired the finance officer. And what they were able to do, let's see, I've got it pulled up here. Let me find it. So the assistant superintendent resigned. District holds a meeting. This was in February of 2020, just as the pandemic started. They entered into a partnership with Education Elements, could develop to move forward personalized learning model, and shows that they started out with 767, but then they did it in smaller separate agreements, but it ended up, here's another 259. So it ended up being a little over $1 million, but they were doing payments from 82 to 89, and some of them were 89,999. She was leaning heavy on that, and so they did let her eventually. They let her take medical leave and resign. They actually charged this CFO. They charged them with a crime, but I don't know how that case was. They did some sort of a plea bargain deal with both of them where they avoided jail time. I'm not sure how much money they had to pay back personally. Again, that was not that was not clear. It's clear to us required educational elements agreement be submitted to the board for approval. Said the board that this was an intent to circumvent the board's vote. I mean, this is a classic case, folks. Couldn't be clearer. This is a classic case of trying to get around Leandra, just as plain as day. The superintendent lost her job. The CFO lost her job. The CFO got charged criminally, almost lost her freedom. Both of them will be paying money back for the rest of their lives. I don't know that either one of them could ever work in any education again. But the whole notion here is you can't just decide how you're going to spend money, even down to the principal level. You've got to budget it. It's got to be approved. If you raise money at your school, you think, well, that's my money. No, it's got to be reflected. You got to get your fundraising approved. It's got to be reflected in your local budget. And the district office gets to say how you spend that money. They can tell you no, that you can't spend your money on that. You know, I mean, that's the thing you've got to realize here is if you're not really careful, you know, two things will get you: your money and your honey. And that's why we kind of put these two together tonight. The other one is the other topic tonight: sexual harassment. These are the two hot button issues that get you fired and might even lose you your freedom. To that point, and we've said that's been our vernacular ever since I've been in the business, is your money or your honey. You better not get either one of them at work. This is not the place to do that. And so I always do. So the second half of tonight, which won't be a half since we've only got about 12 minutes left, is on sexual harassment, sexual misconduct. You know, it's amazing. Willie, you got a question?
Yes, sir. I was reading something about that case, and it said that it was going to in front of the Supreme Court. And
yeah, it's been before the state Supreme Court. Leandro's not over. West Ed is trying to. I mean, they said that they would give schools money on a pork barrel basis but only for capital, like to build. They built up in Stokes or Surrey. They built a cafeteria. I told you that bunch is not smart enough to figure out how to run 2 lunch shifts. So they were building a cafeteria big enough that all 300 kids could go to lunch at one time. It's become pork barrel. Gardner-Webb just got $500,000 pork barrel of state lottery money. First time ever a private school has gotten lottery money. Just got $500,000 for a community project partnership with Cleveland County and the town of Bowling Springs to build an amphitheater. And so there's supposed to be money coming, but it just doesn't get there. I mean, you think about it. You go buy a lottery ticket for, let's say the lottery ticket's a $5 ticket. By the time they pay that idiot to come on TV that Tuesday, Monday, who's that knucklehead that does that commercial Tuesday about trying to get you to buy lottery tickets? He wears one of them. He wears a funny costume like them guys that hold the signs out front and does all that. Their advertising budget's millions of dollars every year, and then then the payouts like 30%, and then the company that runs. When you get done, there's only like 2 or 3% of lottery money is all that's left by the time it goes where it goes, and it's just allotted, and so. They were supposed to give this money to schools, but they haven't been giving it to schools. And so Judge Lee appointed the West Ed committee, and then he retired. They've got a new judge. But anyway, the latest version is that the judge has said that Judge Lee said that Judge Manning retired, Judge Lee, now he's retired, that the General Assembly has to give these low wealth schools $2 billion with a B. But the General Assembly is taking it to the Supreme Court. They're saying that courts can't do that only they can do funding. And so they've offered about $750 million, about just a little more than a third of what the judge said they've had to pay, because they haven't been given these low wealth districts any support from capital. Please remember that in 1966, the state of North Carolina got out of capital funding, and that's completely the responsibility of the local the local school district. And that's what keeps them financially poor, is having to keep their buildings up and pay their power bill, all the capital needs and water, and keep their buses on the road and all that stuff. And so according to the Leandro decision that came out in 1997, the state was supposed to start this lottery and give all these low wealth, give them some of this capital money. Well, there's been no money. And so now the judge said, you're $2 billion behind. But the General Assembly says, sue us, we're not going to give it to you. So this has been an ongoing thing now. This is coming up on the 30th year of Leandro. I mean, it is not going away. But the General Assembly, they're fighting the judge's ruling. They'll end up in the U.S. Supreme Court eventually, because it's back to the constitutionality. Can a judge make a funding body like the General Assembly? Can they make them pay money? And they say no. We're elected, that we got a collection of nitwits to vote for us, makes us experts. That is their argument, that we don't have to have any expertise or any experience or any of that by virtue that we got people to vote for us, we know what's best. And so we'll see how it plays out. But please understand that the bigger issue here is the superintendent can't be moving money around. You can't be moving money around. Whatever you got, this is what it pays. Don't start trying to put money together. Oh, that's a really bad idea. That'll get you to jail quicker than anything else. You start thinking, I'll take a little bit from here, a little bit from there. And I don't have $60,000, but I've got 12 here. And no, let me say no. You can't mix funds either. And there's a code what everything can be spent for. Everything comes earmarked. Even the money you raise, you have to get permission to raise it. You have to tell them what you're going to spend it on. And when you're audited, somebody like Dr. Singh comes out to make sure that that's what you spend it on, what you said you were going to spend it on. Money is the tightest thing in the school business.
I had a principal and an athletic director both lose their job in the same year because we were renting out the facility for like basketball tournaments and whatnot. And CSUSA doesn't directly fund the athletic department.
Right.
So we have to do a lot of fundraising ourselves. The
Right.
athletic director thought it would be a good idea to host these tournaments and then cut the boss out of the picture and not pay CSUSA their cut for somebody renting
Power, electricity, supervision.
Yep. So he was taking those funds directly and funding it into the athletics, and somebody caught wind and then fired the athletic director and the principal because the principal should have known better.
Exactly. Failure to maintain fiscal control is what that's called. Nobody claimed that the principal did anything wrong, but if you're in charge, you can delegate the activity, not the responsibility. I didn't know why, but we paid you to know what he was doing. But you're exactly right. I mean, it costs money to rent out when you rent out a facility, it's not all profit, folks. You got to pay the power bill, the light bill. If it's wintertime in the gym, the heat, you lose money most of the time on those kinds of things, truthfully. And one of the things that I found out in CMS is we lost money on community use of schools. It was just to do the right thing. It was a PR thing. But in terms of the dollars, we lost money. And so one of my doctoral students 2 years ago, she works at Winston-Salem State University. And it was highly controversial, but their new vice president for, I guess it would be auxiliary services that runs housing. He decreed that we will no longer do summer camps. And somebody pointed out, they said, why are you crazy? We bring in $500,000 on these kids coming to our college for summer camp. And he said, yes, we do, but it cost us $1 million. By the time we hire extra supervision, I mean, these kids are underage, extra police, extra supervision, the wear and tear on the dorms, all the staff that we have to employ, the food. I mean, he said we lose twice as much money as we make. And so he said, now, if we're going to do it for a public relations, then somebody needs to send me $500,000 from that division of the college. But if you're expecting me to cover housing and make ends meet and not go up $2,000 or $3,000 a semester for the students who use our dormitories, then we got to stop doing summer camps.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes.
How does it work? Like what's the school? TL Hannah? How does it work when they get that Hollywood money, that movie money?
It goes into the district fund, and they allot it the way that they see fit. You know, there's a lot of, you know, when I got some movie money when I was in Burke County, and it went to capital,
Okay.
but it went to the district. It didn't come to me. It went to the district.
Because when you look at those schools, when you go up 85, you look at those high school football programs up there. I mean, they got stated that their facilities are better than most small college facilities.
Yeah, but they're willing to do that.
Yeah.
But they're willing to tax themselves. They're willing, they partner with private organizations. They're willing to spend that money. I mean, but they're in places that have that money to spend. The problem comes is when you're in a county where it's not that we don't go out and try to get, there's nobody to go out to get it from. And then some places, you know, their priorities are different than in other places. But they're not using tax dollars to fund those activities. They're not using what the state gave them. They're developing that money locally from businesses and corporations, and they're willing to tax themselves. Where was it I was the other day? You know that where I'm sitting right now, I pay a penny more sales tax than you do wherever you are, unless you're in Mecklenburg with me. I pay a penny more here because we're willing to do that. Also, where I'm sitting tonight in the town of Cornelius, they annexed the lakeside just as I moved here right 30 years ago. Where I'm sitting right now, I pay the highest county tax in North Carolina of the 100 counties. I pay Mecklenburg. I also pay the highest city tax in the town of Cornelius. I pay about $1.70. Where nobody else in the state's more than $1.20, I pay $1.70. And also my house evaluation, just the evaluation on my house went up $160,000 last year. Not to 100, just went up 160. The property that I'm sitting in right now is worth 5 times what I paid for it. 5.
So, what about
my
like
tax bill would be like you buying a new car every year.
What about like in Mecklenburg County when I think Nike came in and they wanted to sponsor 4 or 5 schools up there?
Yeah, we got Reebok sponsor us. We were on ESPN when I was high school. We had 2 7-footers. One of them ended up at Indiana. Bobby Knight used to fly his private jet down and come stay with me during the day. He got George Lynch, left-handed 7-footer. The other was Chris Marcus that went to Western Kentucky. I had 2 6'7" kids and 2 7-footers. We were on ESPN for the Friday night basketball. Reebok came in and bought uniforms. But you know, the district got the money.
From my understanding, when Nike wanted to come in, Nike wanted to sponsor Independence because they was winning all them state championships back to back.
Tommy Knox was there.
Yeah, Mallard Creek, and it was maybe Butler or somebody. It was another school that was winning.
Yeah,
it went on the level with Independence.
Mm-hmm.
But they said they shot it down because they said it would. I think they said it would deter all the kids from playing at the Hardens, the Myers Parks, the West Charlottes. They would all want to go to Independence and Mallard Creek.
Well, that's what I mean. The district said, you know, they didn't shoot it down. What they said is that that school just can't have the money, that everybody will have to share in it equally. That's what I'm telling you. Now, that's the rule in CMS. Now, everybody doesn't do it that way. But if you want to come in and partner with us, just like on Big Friday football, Friday night, Big Friday playing the stadium, but everybody gets a cut of that, whether you got a team that gets to play there or not. It goes back to the district, and everybody gets a cut. Now, some districts doesn't do that. They allow different schools to do more than others. But you're exactly right. Reebok sponsored us, but while we got was a set of black unis to be on TV, so that they wanted a color contrast for TV, and so we were red, and whoever we were playing West Charlotte, and there wasn't enough color, so they got us a set of black, kind of plain black unis, so that it would show up on TV. But other than that, that's all we got. The money went to the district. When we do Big Friday, the money would go to the district. We didn't get that money.
What school were you at when you was
Olympic.
doing? Okay.
We got, that's a local decision. But the notion there follows along with that. We're not going to make winners and losers. Everybody's going to share equal. But, but that's just a local CMS kind of thing. But what you got to understand is you got to know whatever your district does as well in terms of their financial requirements. Before I close up tonight, I've got a sexual harassment video or presentation. You should watch that. It's bad. The irony of ironies is, what I was doing leading up to this class tonight was watching a training video on sexual Title IX that came out just a few minutes before this class. I watched the video to get it in tonight. I'm glad I understand it now, since I'm supposed to be teaching that to y'all. Kind of helpful, I guess, that I know that stuff. But, we're putting the check in the box, and it's designed for college reporting. As a person responsible, I have to do that. But, the big thing about when you get reports of sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual anything, call the law. Do not mount an investigation. When you get a cyber bullying claim, do not mount an investigation. Involve your police. They have greater powers of subpoena than you. You don't want to get involved in an investigation and turn over a rock, and it's a whole lot worse than what you were thinking it was going to be. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, these people are having sex, or this person has done something bad to this person. And then we go to the police, and then you tell them, well, I've already done these statements, and I've already done this, and I've already done that. And boy, they don't want to get involved then. I am telling you, if there's an issue with cyberbullying, get your SRO involved. I told you the story about at Bailey Middle School. The kid was over at Huff next door. He was 18. He was blackmailing these girls into sexual situations. They were sending him inappropriate pictures, and he was using them to have sex with underage girls, and him 18. It was really nasty. Cyberbullying, but I don't care if somebody just says I'm being sexually harassed. That's still a crime. Get in touch with your SRO, folks. You're not qualified to do investigations of a sexual nature, and you don't have subpoena power to get somebody's cell phone. And I would say I wouldn't be trying to confiscate people's cell phones and take stuff like that from them. That's not a good idea. The police can do that kind of stuff. So if you get cyberbullying and it's coming from phones, get the police involved. Anything, anything sexual, go to your SRO. That's your first notion. And you know what's appropriate, how to conduct yourself. You're not supposed to be involved, don't fish off the company pier. Don't be involved in any kind of relationships where you work. That's just not a good thing. And don't allow people that work for you to have any kind of relationships, even if it's peer relationships, like a faculty. That stuff's inappropriate at the building. It never ends well. That's just like, sometimes you inherit boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife teams. And when that goes bad, one of them sets the other one's, room on fire, or, trust me, I've had this kind of stuff to happen. None of that stuff ever ends well. So, make sure that you understand that our response to any of this is we're going to get police involved and let them tell us where we're going to go with our investigation. Our first call will be the police. Our second will be to our central office supervisor. Make sure that we understand that. I think you're prepared for your Leandro case next week. Again, if you're ready to start the skip, I'll cover the skip next week with you. If you have issues, I've already covered it one time, but I will cover it again next week. We're about to the point where we're ready to start it. Make sure that you're knocking out those tasks for your OMA. Upload the work that you did on your case study so that you can be sure to get your credit for it. You did such a great job. I want to make sure you get your credit. Dr. Sain, as always, thank you for being with us tonight. Your expertise is always and is most relevant to what we do since you live it every day. I'll give you the opportunity to close us out this evening.
I'll do it quickly. 3 things. One, when you become an AP, know your budget codes. And Dr. Lamb referenced money can only be spent in certain areas. There's about 16 letter numbers in those budget codes, and it is the most confusing thing you'll ever do. But you have to know them, because the excuse of I didn't know or I don't know what code is not, it's not going to hold up against anything. The second one is know who your Title IX contact is within your district, so you can always ask questions. Every district has one. I'm the one for Lincoln County Schools. Know who that person is. And then the third thing is take every complaint, whether it be sexual, cyberbullying, take every complaint equally and seriously. Even if you know it's bogus, still take it like it's actually happening. Those 3 things from tonight's class are just go away with those. You will be an effective administrator because of those 3 things.
Absolutely. So again, I thank you all for joining us this evening. I appreciate the quality of the work that you're doing. Jennifer is racing through those discussion boards. She's the star on that. Sonia's doing hers as well. So Tyler's knocking them out. Nate, everybody's doing a good job here. Make sure that you're getting your points. And as always, thank you for choosing Garden Web, and I'll see you next Wednesday. And again, excuse me, next Monday. I can't wait for your next case study. That's the most fun we have. I'll see you next Monday. Thank you.